Before we get into anything else, subscribe to The Survival Record if you value serious, in-depth historical analysis rather than surface-level summaries. What we're looking at today isn't a romanticized relic of World War II. It's a logistical system, quiet, disciplined, and remarkably efficient, that solved problems modern campers still struggle with. The lesser-known reality is this. In sustained field conditions, the average World War II field kitchen arrangement often outperformed what many civilians today rely on as advanced portable stoves. Not because it was lighter, not because it was high-tech, but because it was designed around endurance, scale, and fuel uncertainty. Three factors modern recreational gear rarely prioritizes. This is not about nostalgia, it is about design under pressure. What most people misunderstand about wartime cooking is that it was a combat function. When we talk about World War II logistics, we tend to focus on tanks, aircraft production, or convoy routes. Food is treated as background noise, but every major army understood that hot food was operational capability. A unit that could not feed itself properly would see morale collapse, discipline weaken, and physical performance decline long before ammunition ran out. In the German army, the field kitchen, known as the Gulaschkanone, was a standard component of infantry formations. It was horse-drawn early in the war and later motorized where possible. The United States Army deployed compact gasoline-powered burner systems such as the M1937 Field Range, capable of cooking for company-sized units with remarkable efficiency. The Soviet Red Army relied on mobile cauldron systems mounted on carts or sledges, adapted to mud, snow, and extreme cold. These were not crude contraptions. They were engineered responses to predictable hardship, irregular resupply, limited fuel types, and the need to feed anywhere from 100 to 250 men at once. The design logic, really prioritized fuel flexibility over convenience. Modern camp stoves these days are optimized for clean-burning propane canisters or refined white gas. They kind of assume steady supply chains and reliable consumer access. But during World War II, field kitchens assumed the opposite. German and Soviet systems, for example, were built to burn wood, coal, peat, or even scrap lumber. The combustion chambers were insulated and structured specifically to maintain heat for long simmering. And this mattered quite a lot, because wartime rations often consisted of dried legumes, grains, or tough cuts of meat that required extended cooking. A system that boiled quickly but lost heat rapidly was frankly inefficient in the field. The German Gulaschkanone, interestingly enough, used double-walled kettles that functioned almost like early thermal retention systems. Heat transfer was carefully controlled, and once brought to temperature, large quantities of stew could be maintained with surprisingly little additional fuel. In those freezing Eastern Front conditions, this insulation preserved both heat and fuel, two resources that were, always in short supply. Modern survivalists, I think, often overlook this principle. Lightweight stoves certainly excel at short bursts of high heat, but they're less efficient for sustained cooking unless you pair them with additional fuel and wind protection. Wartime kitchens, on the other hand, assumed wind, rain, snow, and the absence of anything resembling ideal conditions. Scale, really, was not an afterthought. It was the point. A single modern camp stove might reliably cook for, say, 2 to 4 people. That's certainly sufficient for recreational use, but it becomes a liability in extended emergencies. World War II field kitchens were designed around company-level cohesion. Feeding 150 men from one centralized system meant less fuel per capita, less duplicated equipment, and importantly, fewer exposed flame points that could reveal a position at night. Centralization reduced chaos. It also reinforced discipline units gathered ate in sequence, and then returned to duty. The United States Army's M1937 field range could, bake bread, roast meat, and boil coffee all at the same time. That kind of versatility meant ration components could actually be transformed, not just heated up. Fresh bread or hot coffee had real measurable psychological value. Morale reports from United States Army units in Europe time and again noted that access to hot meals really increased resilience during those long, drawn-out operations. This focus on morale through food, well, it ended up influencing post-war doctrine. Even today, modern military field feeding systems still make hot meals a priority whenever it's tactically feasible. The lesson was clear. Calories sustain the body, but warmth sustains the will. Weather exposure, honestly, revealed which systems were truly resilient. The Eastern Front put field kitchens through tests that, frankly, recreational gear never even anticipates. Temperatures often dropped below -20 degrees Celsius. Fuel gels would thicken, metal became brittle, and snow and mud just swallowed up wheeled transport. German and Soviet kitchen crews had to improvise constantly. Chimneys were shortened to make smoke less visible, and snow walls were built as windbreaks. In some sectors, kitchens were actually partially dug into the ground, both to conserve heat and reduce aerial visibility. Modern stoves, especially those canister-based systems, they suffer dramatic pressure drops in extreme cold. Unless you pre-warm them or invert them with some specialized adapters, the output really declines sharply. World War II kitchens, though, bypassed this vulnerability by relying on solid fuels that could be gathered locally. The performance might have been less elegant, but it was definitely more reliable. And in wartime, reliability always outranked convenience. Centralized cooking actually reduced risk in ways modern campers, rarely consider. Every flame produces light and smoke. And in combat zones, that meant exposure. So centralizing cooking to one controlled, concealed site reduced detectable signatures. It also importantly reduced accidental fires in those densely packed encampments. On the Pacific Islands, United States Marine units often faced these relentless tropical downpours that honestly made small fires pretty much useless. Larger, shielded field ranges could be kept operational, under canvas or whatever makeshift roofing was available. The alternative, multiple individual cooking attempts, well, that would have just multiplied all the possible failure points. There's also a huge sanitation factor to consider. Field kitchens enforce proper washing procedures, ration accountability, and waste management. Improvised individual cooking really increases the risk of contamination. In wartime, disease has historically disabled more soldiers than combat ever did. So, organized feeding actually reduced that vulnerability. This was not simply about feeding the troops, it was about preserving combat strength through controlled systems. The men assigned to cook were, in fact, logisticians under a lot of pressure. Kitchen crews were rarely celebrated, yet they operated under artillery threat, air attack, and constantly shifting front lines. They moved heavy equipment through mud and snow, rationed fuel carefully, and often arrived near forward positions just after nightfall to distribute hot food before withdrawing to safer ground. Their work really reveals something survivalists sometimes neglect. Food preparation is labor-intensive. It takes planning, timing, and coordination. The mythology of rugged individualism, well, it collapses pretty quickly when you're trying to feed large groups in unstable environments. Armies that maintained effective field kitchens, they actually sustained cohesion longer. Those that failed saw desertion, black market trading, and, weakened discipline. Post-war militaries quietly absorbed these lessons. After 1945, armed forces across NATO and the Warsaw Pact invested heavily in mobile kitchen modernization. Fuel efficiency improved, insulation materials advanced, but the conceptual framework honestly remained the same: centralized, flexible, Durable systems outperform lightweight individual solutions during extended operations. Even humanitarian relief organizations adopted similar principles. Disaster response feeding units are essentially civilian descendants of wartime field kitchens. They operate on scalable fuel sources, protected burners, and large-capacity vessels. Modern outdoor recreation, interestingly enough, moved in the opposite direction, toward miniaturization and speed. That shift makes sense for short-term outings with guaranteed resupply. It makes less sense in prolonged grid-down scenarios. The comparison isn't about superiority in all contexts, it's about context itself. What this really reveals about preparedness today is that the World War II field kitchen arrangement reminds us that survival is rarely about a single gadget. It's about systems thinking, fuel diversity, insulation, scale efficiency, and redundancy matter more than sleek design. In a prolonged emergency, natural disaster, infrastructure failure, or remote expedition, the ability to cook with varied fuels and sustain heat over time becomes, well, decisive. Many modern campers discover too late that proprietary canisters are useless when stores are closed or supply chains are disrupted. The wartime model assumed scarcity from the outset. It built resilience into the structure. This doesn't mean dragging a 400-kilogram cauldron into the wilderness. It means adopting the underlying logic, protect heat, centralize effort when in groups, diversify fuel options, and plan for extended use rather than weekend convenience. The overlooked truth is that these kitchens were not primitive. They were optimized for reality. World War II was a brutal laboratory for logistics. Field kitchens evolved under constant stress. They endured mud, ice, sabotage, and bombing. They fed millions daily across continents. When evaluated by the standards that matter in sustained hardship, fuel adaptability, thermal retention, capacity, and organizational efficiency, they often outperform modern camp stoves designed for controlled leisure environments. That does not diminish modern engineering. It clarifies its purpose. Remembering these quieter aspects of war matters because they reveal how survival actually works, not in theory, not in marketing copy, but in the long, grinding continuity of conflict and uncertainty. If you value this kind of grounded analytical examination of overlooked wartime systems, subscribe to the Survival Record. Share this video with others who appreciate serious historical depth. These stories are not about glorifying war. They are about understanding the systems that kept human beings functioning when everything else was collapsing, and what that still teaches us today.